All right, we are back with another February Focus on Forms class and training that we're doing. Part of the rollout with some of the new forms that we are releasing internally. We've done so far the buyer contract and listing contract for Michigan Realtors. We then have done a couple sessions on our brand new purchase agreement. Today, we're going to keep that aligned with some of the addenda referenced in that new purchase agreement. We have specifically the occupancy addendum and the well and septic addendum, and then we have a couple others that we may get to as well. So I'm going to share my screen and get us started with the occupancy addendum. Now, we removed all like paragraph language from the purchase agreement and have decided that yes, if you're going to do occupancy, you definitely have to include an addendum if it's not possession at closing. So this is the one that we are recommending that you use, and we can just go through it to talk about why it's crafted the way it is. So occupancy addendum regarding the property known as, put in the address, subject to payment of the occupancy charge described below, purchaser agrees that seller may occupy the premises until 5 p.m. on blank date. So, now I know I'm the type that I also often just write in here like 30 days after closing, rather than a specific date. But yeah, it allows you to do either. You can either put in a specific March 31st date, or you could say 30 days after closing. Either way, it's making it clear that 5 o'clock is when they need to get out on that day. So
Jordan, I have a question because I tend to do the opposite and specifically put dates for essentially the reason that I know closing dates can change occasionally, a plus or minus a day or two, and it doesn't, by putting a date in here, it doesn't change the occupancy date itself. Just, if we were supposed to close on the 10th and it was 30 days of occupancy, and instead you close on the 12th, now it's only 28 days of occupancy. So that date the buyer gets possession is the same. Thoughts on
so
pros
it
and cons?
well, yeah. So one of the things that I often think of though is it is going to depend on kind of what the occupancy charge is. So because if you're in a bidding war and you're trying to sweeten the pot by saying, hey, 30 days free occupancy, if you then put in a solid date here, and then it's a buyer caused delay of the closing, so instead of, and it starts to eat into that occupancy charge, you're then just basically shifting or decreasing the amount of free occupancy you were giving to the sellers, which they may take umbrage at, because they wanted to be able to stay for 30 days for free. But no, I mean, I do. Oh, and then you also have the reverse side of, hey, if your buyer is able to close early, and so then, okay, they close early, but then they're being penalized by paying for a house that they don't get to actually take possession of until the scheduled date here, rather than it being a set number of days that they were planning for. But I mean, yeah, there is no actual right or wrong. I'm the lazy type that wants to think down the road. I don't want to have to change a bunch of things later. So, I don't want it to be that changing the closing date, then I also have to at the same time change the occupancy addendum. If instead the occupancy addendum is kind of fluid, to go with whatever date of closing, then it's less likely to need to have an addendum to this addendum, basically, is my thought. But that's me. There's no right or wrong. But I think it's important that either option is allowable in the occupancy addendum, which it is. All right, occupancy charge escrow. At closing, seller will pay into escrow the occupancy charge specified below to be held by the listing broker until the possession date. So the listing broker will be the escrow account rather than a title company. The listing broker shall pay the buyer the amount due and return to seller the unused portion as determined by date property is vacated and keys surrendered to the listing broker. So that's a important thing, is that, it's when the property is vacated and keys are surrendered, that stops the occupancy charge. So it doesn't matter when the buyers pick up the keys. What matters is when the sellers turn them in. And this makes it very clear that the sellers are to turn in those keys to the listing broker. The parties acknowledge that the broker has no obligation, implied or otherwise, to see that the premises are vacated on the date specified or for the condition of the premises, etc., but is acting only as an escrow agent for holding of the occupancy deposit. So we're not responsible if the sellers don't vacate. It's not our responsibility to knock on the door and kick them out. Likewise, if the sellers have trashed the place, we are not responsible. It's that becomes litigation between the purchaser and the seller, and we're not supposed to be in the middle of that just because of this occupancy situation. Within 5 business days after delivery of the keys by the seller, the escrow agent will disperse escrow according to the terms of the escrow agreement to be signed at closing. So this is saying that there will be a future document at closing that all parties will sign, creating the escrow for this, the actual, having the terms of how it's going to be dispersed. If occupancy money is to be released in 30-day increments, all parties initial here, but typically I've never actually seen that initialed. In part because, at most you're looking at 60 days on an occupancy addendum. I know that's like a hard rule when it comes to the lenders. I don't know if it's a hard rule in real estate in general, because it's one of those that it's considered by lenders, at least, that if you're doing more than 60 days of occupancy, then it turns into a lease situation, landlord tenant, for their view as a lending institution. They don't view it as the buyer becoming the owner and eventual occupant, but instead the buyer's purchasing it then as a investment property with a renter. But yeah, so typically then, if you were initially in this, you'd only have the 30-day increment dispersed, and then at the end, if you're doing 60 days total. Anything that I've missed in covering that, do you think, Rebecca?
I don't think so. I also agree that occupancy money being released in 30 days, I've never really seen that. The only thing that I noted on my own is we might change that listing broker to designated escrow agent or something like that, at least for the escrow, who's holding the escrow.
Okay.
I do believe it is not always Remax Platinum holding that anymore.
That's one reason I wanted to highlight that that's what it currently says. Okay.
Yep.
So we may
So
have it
you will likely see that change. I've highlighted it on my paper copy to make a little update on that one.
Okay. And then all right, so then within 5 days after delivery of keys. So the sellers can know that when they turn in the keys, then what the escrow agent is doing is making note of whatever day the keys are acquired. And so I keep in mind, this is where the sellers are agreeing to actually physically give keys over to the listing agent and or broker. So just stopping by the office and turning in keys, not just, saying, hey, I'm out. There's a lockbox on the door. They're supposed to actually have delivered the keys. But it's very common for it to be that they've left and the buyer's agent meets the buyers there and uses the lockbox to get in. The downside to that is, when they turn in the keys, they're then supposed to sign the additional escrow form showing that, hey, I have now turned in the keys, and then that person at our office can note the time and all that. It's a little bit cleaner and more proper if they do it in person at the listing brokerage office, or any of our locations, basically, if we're on the listing side. All right, so then here you have the three different ways you can charge for occupancy. They each have their pros and cons. Lump sum, so the total amount of blank to be paid as an occupancy charge, regardless of how long they stay. So if the buyers feel that, okay, just by not having possession of the house, they have to make another payment on their mortgage, and so they just want, a flat 2,000, whether the seller moves out a week or up to 30 days later, or whatever, the deadline is up here. Even if the sellers move out early, they're paying a flat amount. There's pros and cons to that. The downside is then it kind of just encourages the sellers to just drag their feet, or like if they're ready to move and able to get out, you should want them to get out and give them that incentive to do so, financially. Most of the time, though, if you're doing free occupancy, this is where you just put $0 lump sum for this entire occupancy charge. Daily rate, the daily amount of blank, times the number of days from and including the day after closing through the day of vacating. So the day of closing they don't have to pay for, but the day after closing through the day so if you close on Friday and they turn in the keys the following Thursday, they're paying for Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 6 days. So they didn't pay for the Friday that they closed on, but they are paying for that Thursday. Or if it's Thursday after 5 o'clock, then they'll actually be paying for that additional day, that Friday.
Just a quick question. Have either of you guys ever seen a occupancy addendum where they don't have a time and it ended up being, 10:30, 11, 11:30 at night when they're trying to vacate the property and turn in keys?
I have
Never
had
seen a
that.
time either. Yeah.
Yep. No, it's been an interesting one where, my sellers were like, yeah, we'll be out by 8. And then it's 9 o'clock and they're still not fully out. And I have to break the bad news. Like, yeah, they're gonna be out before midnight, but it's taking longer than expected. And yeah, and I mean that's so having a 5 o'clock, because also from just the concept of the closing, since they aren't paying for the day of closing, they're closing before 5 o'clock, almost certainly. So it then makes sense that, okay, 24 hours later, it's just on a rolling basis of every 24 hours from 5 o'clock to 5 o'clock. That's, the buyers do not have access to the property during that chunk. So they get, there's a charge. Trying to come up with a daily rate is interesting. I remember one last summer that we had a daily rate, and my clients objected to it and wanted to do 1/30th PITI. But then when I looked at what it was, literally basically apples to apple. Like the buyer's agent did a very good job estimating what the daily rate would be for their client's 1/30th PITI, but just figured it was cleaner to be upfront and clear as to what the amount would be, rather than this third option here, 1/30th PITI. The fixed daily amount representing 1/30th of buyer's monthly installment payment of principal and interest, property taxes, and hazard insurance, and private mortgage insurance if applicable, times the number of days from and including the day after closing through the day of vacating the property. So take their monthly mortgage payment, divide it by 30, and charge that for each day of occupancy. Um, Pros and cons on this is, well, if it's somebody doing a large down payment, then this amount is less. If it's somebody doing like a 100% financing or FHA and they have PMI, then it's going to be a larger amount. So now in theory though, I mean it makes sense from the buyer and seller understanding that, hey, every day that the sellers stay in the house, the buyers don't get to possess it and enjoy it. And so whatever it's costing the buyer to own that property but not get to enjoy it, the seller is agreeing to pay for that. Regardless of whether or not that buyer put a large down payment or not. It's just, it's a break even concept, which makes sense. Um, so yeah, I mean, I rarely see the daily rate. I almost always see, 1/30th PITI or $0 as a lump sum.
It's interesting.
But
I almost always fill daily rate,
oh, really?
even if it's
Okay.
zero.
Okay. Hmm. All right. Holdover penalty. If seller fails to surrender possession by the scheduled possession date, seller will pay to buyer a holdover rate of 1.5 times the daily amount specified in B or C above, or blank per day. So, um, that means if you checked A and did any amount, $0, $2,000, whatever it is, doesn't matter, then you don't get to rely on this boilerplate to protect your buyers. You want to put in an amount here. Now, if you checked either C or B or C, and you have an amount here that's more than zero for the daily rate, then understand that the boilerplate is saying it's 1.5 times whatever this happens to be. But I think best practice is put a number in here and make it hurt. I
Yep.
think $400 a day, three or 400. Um, because if you just consider it like what are the actual costs that a buyer is going to incur if they have to go get a hotel room while they wait for these sellers to move out. Um, so
Well,
I mean, I
now
think,
the next or the second sentence after that
oh
actually
yeah, still
makes it
liable for,
above. They're still
yes,
liable for that, so it could be above that amount.
yes,
I always tell my clients, let's make it more expensive than having them go to a hotel. So as long as
yeah,
it costs more than the daily rate at a hotel by a
yes,
not small amount, obviously, but then we're encouraging them to move out even if they might not be ready to go to their new home.
yes. No, actually, yeah, that's a better way to put it. That rather than the cost of a buyer getting a hotel room while they're waiting, you know, it will cost the seller less to get the hotel room and move out, even though they don't have their next move ready, you know, than stay here and pay $400 a day. Another easy way to consider just calculating any of this, like a daily amount or what have you, because let's say you had a cash buyer. Um, and so, I mean, there is no 1/30th PITI and all that. I mean, you can just try to do a quick market analysis to figure out, okay, what would a home like this rent out for? And consider that to be, the 30-day cost. So divided by 30 to get a daily amount here. And then try to do 1.5 times that here. Um, but yeah, so I mean, because if it's a nice, $500,000 house, you may want more than $400 a day. I don't know. So, but yeah, so this amount, whether it's 1.5 times or whatever you fill in, Uh, so that is only just a penalty separate from the actual additional, but we will get to that. Holdover rate applies from and including the scheduled possession date through the actual possession date. Okay, so they were supposed to be out on Thursday. They fail to turn in the keys Thursday before 5 o'clock. So then they get charged. If they turn in the keys Thursday at 8 o'clock, they get charged the holdover penalty.
For
Um,
Thursday.
you know, all the way through to actual possession date. Okay. In any event, seller is also liable for buyer's actual and reasonable expenses incurred as a result of the holdover by seller. So yes, if the buyer does have pets and moving vans and all the stuff, and they've, whatever the buyer has to take on as an expense that's reasonable to account for their situation, they can then pursue the seller for those damages. And this agreement is indicating that the seller should be liable for it. Um, Obviously, litigation and all that, it's up to judges to be the final arbiter, but this contract in the language is designed to instruct the judge in how to view things.
Well,
All right,
I will say for anything that would fall under that holdover penalty, you're most likely going to have to go to court to
oh yeah,
enforce it since there is no money being held by anyone for it.
right,
It's something to
because
keep in mind.
yes, because keeping, and that's where I have often seen people try to view this next escrow as being used for this, but it's not supposed to be. The holdover penalty, you almost certainly have to just get into the courts to get the money from the people. All right, damage deposit escrow. At closing, seller will also pay into escrow the sum of blank dollars, so 2,000, as a damage deposit to cover repairs or damages sustained during seller's occupancy. So the occupancy, not damages that just happen to be, at the house, but only those damages that were sustained during the occupancy period. So from the time they closed to the time they vacated and turned in keys. Escrow agent will disperse the damage deposit within 5 business days of receipt of a damage deposit escrow release signed by both parties. So if there's a fight over the damage deposit and you don't get both parties to sign, then it delays disbursement, obviously. If on the actual possession date, repairs or damages exceed the amount of the damage deposit, seller will immediately upon demand pay the excess amount to buyer. So this is again designed to be that if it gets into litigation, here are the instructions that hey, this is not gray at all. It's black and white. Seller will pay the excess damages to the buyer.
I had a
Um,
question.
yes,
This is an escrow that I've been using on a regular basis because everyone is staying, all the sellers are staying in their homes.
yes,
They're not getting out immediately. So I remember about a year ago at meetings in Ann Arbor, we were trying to really fine tune this 30-day or 40-day period where an escrow deposit would help you in the event that normal wear and tear actually does happen to the property. A refrigerator will go out, a furnace will go out, problems with a leak underneath the sink. And what I did is I tightened up the language to add another paragraph to the Michigan Association of Realtors form that would tighten that all up. However, with my last transaction, I ran into a problem. And the agent who was from Wayne County basically said to me, it's your buyer's home. And that this damage escrow deposit is not to be used for normal wear and tear items. that would have happened whether they were in it or if the sellers were in it. It was going to happen because it's normal. This damage deposit escrow is based on intentional damage in a move. So I had to back down a little, but I'm not sure of exactly how we're looking at this. And also, I will tell you about last year, I used this damage deposit escrow because the seller were not real sharp. They did not they did not take care of things along the way. But when we arrived to exchange the keys, the garage was filled up with massive trash that should have been removed. And we held that as basically in hostage, hostage. So they wouldn't get their money back till they removed it. And because that was damage, the way I looked at it, was damage to my seller, my buyer, if they had to go ahead and spend money and work hard and use their own physical labor to remove that. So I used it. But what do you think about this normal wear and tear?
So
So I'll chime in. I'll say the damage deposit, because we specify that it covers repairs, I would think that means repair of anything in the house if the issue was sustained during the seller's occupancy. So if the furnace goes out and needs to be repaired, that counts. That can be covered by the damage deposit escrow in my mind, because it is a repair that needs to be done during the seller's occupancy. And I agree with your take on the damages for stuff left in the house. I agree. I think that damages are sustained by the buyer if they are required to move those things. And therefore, it's a monetary damage, but it's still damage technically. But
Yes.
therefore, that would be acceptable to use the damage deposit for, in my opinion, either of those things.
Well, I
Because
ran
we
into
included repair and the,
right. Well,
yeah.
I ran into some pushback on that. So the whole thing is that I did back down because I didn't really want to push it because everything was going smooth, and it turned out they didn't need the 30 days anyway. They only needed 7. So I was able to dodge a bullet. But the bottom line is there are some sellers that are not considerate and they don't care. And you have to turn around and really do protect yourself and your buyers. And I don't know if there should be more verbiage with more outlining of this particular escrow.
one thing I do want to point out is if possessions are still like, trash is still in the garage, then I would be arguing that the property has not been vacated at that point. And so then, that's the leverage that we have to say, yeah, I mean, they may want to say, well, it's not actually damaged. Well, yeah, okay, it's not damaged like drywall is not broken, but you haven't vacated, you haven't met the terms of this. And so then sure, I mean, even though you turned in keys, you didn't do both vacate and turn in keys. And so therefore then occupancy is still going on, and this holdover penalty can then apply until you remove all the stuff and properly vacate. So that would be, one point of leverage on the stuff in the garage. As far as the normal wear and tear, I mean, there's normal wear and tear built into our purchase agreement, but it says that, the seller shall keep things in the same condition aside from normal wear and tear. The furnace breaking is not normal wear and tear that the seller could, you do the final walkthrough and the furnace is broken. And when the seller's just like, well, that's just normal wear and tear that was going to occur, regardless. And it's like, well, no, I mean, we were buying a house with a furnace that was functioning and now it's not. Your job is to keep it, maintain that same condition. And I mean, if I cannot prevent a judge from interpreting things differently, but I mean, the concept should still apply here that it's the sellers during their occupancy have an obligation to keep the home in the same condition. And this damage deposit escrow is to cover if there's any change in condition between, the closing date and the possession date. That's my interpretation of it, just because, I mean, the idea that, oh, a furnace going out is part of normal wear and tear, that's not how the purchase agreement treats it. And I don't think then that the occupancy addendum should treat it any differently.
Okay, so I did ask for a large damage deposit escrow to make sure that air conditioning and furnace and all those things were covered. And so what kind of money are people asking for these days in regards to an escrow for damage?
I mean, I do about 2,000, depends on the, price of the home, but 2,000 seems to be, uh, I mean, that's just my take on it, but I mean, I don't actually have a solid recommendation. It all depends, I guess, on circumstance. But I mean, because I guess the question is, what is it most likely to be used towards? And then can you have an amount that is likely to cover what it may be needed for 80% of the time? And now, 80% of the time, you shouldn't need it at all, but when it is needed, you want an amount that should be sufficient most of the time.
So why would other real estate agents back off and not understand the general concept of a seller delivering a home in the same condition that it was purchased and closed on? I mean, why would you get pushback from that?
There's
You
agents
sh
out there who are willing to take an unreasonable position, justifying it because they would say they're doing their clients a fiduciary duty to just fight for them, even if it's an unreasonable interpretation of things in doing so.
I look at it as it's possibly old school, and that back in the day, we didn't have to dig in so and have every word correct in order to protect our clients. And I'm thinking that they're just not thinking about all the little things that could happen, that eventually what has happened. The reason why we're talking about it is because someone has gotten bitten by it at one
Right.
time. So, maybe it has never happened to them, and that's why they're not getting it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the word repairs really does do the heavy lifting here. That,
Okay.
I mean, a repair means you had something and then its condition degraded in some way, and you need to repair it to bring it up to the previous condition. Um, and that's a broad umbrella of what may need repair. And yeah, a furnace no longer functioning, it needs to be repaired. And this damage deposit should definitely apply to that. I mean, I can't imagine it
com
not. In part
combining
because,
this
hmm?
with the condition statement in the PA, if you were to take both of these paragraphs and show them to an agent who's giving you pushback, I would struggle to see how they would continue to give you pushback, right?
Okay.
They've already agreed in the PA that they will maintain until possession is delivered, heating, well, septic, plumbing, electrical, landscape, yada, yada, yada. This is just saying, okay, now we're putting some money behind that.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. And I feel better talking with you about it because I've been an agent for 16, but I was dealing with somebody who's been an agent for 49. So, it's kind of like I want to make sure, that I'm on the right track and thinking the right way. So,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah. And that's where, yeah, I mean, that's why it's nice that in the purchase agreement, it doesn't just say certain things about, until closing, it says until possession. And so that purchase agreement extends over into this occupancy period. The occupancy addendum is just about, creating the escrows and additional penalties. But yeah, it doesn't, this is not the end all be all of the seller's obligation. The purchase agreement dives deeper into the seller's obligation when it comes to property condition until possession. All right, insurance. From the date of closing, buyer will maintain hazard insurance on the property, and seller will maintain insurance for liability and seller's personal property. So in theory, both parties are supposed to get insurance on the property from the date of closing through possession date. Buyer is not responsible for damage or injury to seller or seller's personal property. Seller will not be required to pay for losses covered by buyer's hazard insurance policy claim. So if the house burns down while the seller is still living there during the occupancy period, and the buyer's hazard insurance pays to build a new house, the buyer doesn't also get to sue the seller for that same $500,000 rebuild cost, basically double dipping both from the insurance and the seller. However, seller will pay the deductible on buyer's hazard insurance for any claims made while seller is in possession, which are attributable to seller's acts or omissions. So not an act of God, lightning strikes and burns down the house, seller is not paying the deductible, buyer still has to pay that. But if the seller sets the house on fire by burning something in the kitchen and the house burns down, seller's paying the deductible. Am I interpreting all that right, Rebecca?
That is my interpretation.
Okay. So, I mean, it's one of those that it's, you don't even think about these paragraphs until you're in a situation in which they come into play. And so, yeah.
For me, one of the big things with this paragraph, because your buyer's going to have, if they're getting a mortgage, they're going to have to get insurance prior to closing. It's just part of the way it works. For me, this paragraph is really for the sellers to understand that, look, just because you don't own it anymore, don't drop your insurance on it. It is still your responsibility to have liability insurance and personal property insurance for your things in the house. Buyer's coverage is not going to cover you as the seller. So this is kind of that chance for, if you get this on one of yours, to call out for your seller to say, look, just make sure you remember to do this, because otherwise you might end up in a tight spot.
All right. Inspection. Buyer is entitled to an inspection of the property immediately prior to the surrender of possession by the seller. This is one I didn't even know that this was in here.
Yeah, this was one I copied and pasted from our existing.
I've never enacted this clause. So
I think it's the walks. It's equivalent to your walkthrough, right?
Right,
You
but
meet
that
at the
means
house to do keys.
that means then that before the seller actually gives the keys, the buyer is entitled to re-inspect the property. I don't really understand that one, to be honest, because
I think
most of the time the seller, just is in the move out process, and then now they're moved out, and they're turning in the keys. But the idea that once before they've handed in the keys, they need to give the buyer the opportunity to do a re-inspect. That has not in practice been what I have seen, where
I would argue the buyer needs to request that if they want it.
Okay, all right, so they're entitled to
That
if
doesn't mean
they
that
request it.
they're necessarily going to do it, but if they want to do a walkthrough before seller
That
surrenders
would
possession.
really be the best practice, but in the real life hustle and bustle, sellers are, just
Yes.
frantic trying to get out. They get out. They then don't want to have to patiently wait for the buyer to come to the property, and both parties, everybody does a kumbaya, walk through the home, and everybody's happy. And okay, so the damage deposit's being released, everything is good. That would be the ideal, but in the real world, sellers likely aren't planning their move out in a way that accommodates that, to where they have to wait for the buyer to show up. and do a walkthrough with them. But I guess with this addendum, our clients would be entitled to demand that.
I can ask Bill about that specific line since it was a copy paste from the others, and I really didn't put a lot of thought into that one.
Yeah. All right.
I
So
think
this,
we do need, because the walkthrough on the PA specifies closing, not possession.
yeah, yeah,
I believe we need to have something that includes a walkthrough for possession, whether it is before or after surrender by the seller.
yeah.
Maybe we call it a
I
walkthrough.
don't think it's a bad idea. I really
Well,
don't think it's a bad idea at all.
right. No, the question is enforceability. Like if the seller is showing up at the listing brokerage to turn in the keys, and the buyer's agent is like, well, my clients wanted to, or were entitled to do an inspection of the property before those keys are surrendered. Um, and so technically speaking, until we do our inspection, possession hasn't ended. And then it's the buyer delaying when possession actually is turned over. Because if the buyer is not ready to get to the house to do that immediate inspection, that I could easily see so many fights in.
I can see some ambiguity there that needs to be cleaned up. I do
Yeah,
agree that we need to have something there, whether it should be, maybe it should be immediately before or after the
right,
surrender of possession
right,
by the seller.
yeah,
Um,
and that's where, yeah, and I mean even mention the property condition checklist thing. Like I mean that because I mean I know that's something we use is a checklist of items that buyers are supposed to, once they get possession, go through and check all this stuff off. And if there's no issues, then, yeah, then we have them sign the damage deposit release, with the full amount going to the seller. But if there is a problem, then it's documented on this checkoff list. Um, and it was funny because I was reteaching the second half of the purchase agreement today in person in Fenton, and we were going through different scenarios regarding condition and all that. And the question is, okay, they see the house, the window is fine. You do the inspection, the window is fine. Then, oh, the window gets a crack in it. They do the walkthrough. They don't notice the cracked window. They sign, they purchase the house, but there's 30 days occupancy. They then get possession after 30 days, and that's when they notice the cracked window. And it's okay, what then? And I was making it very clear that, well, at the time that they are signing, they are accepting the property condition as is in that moment. They had the opportunity to do a final walkthrough, and that is the purpose of the final walkthrough, to notice that the window was cracked, and to object at that point and do all the remedies laid out in the purchase agreement. But if they don't at that point and they sign and they accept the condition as is at the closing, then okay, we have this damage deposit and all that stuff, but that is only for damages and repairs, sustained during the occupancy period, not, for anything that was before they signed on at the closing. So that cracked window the buyers would have to accept, even though they would argue it occurred after the inspection but before possession. But if it occurs after close or before closing, then that's the whole point of the final walkthrough. So I mean that was just an interesting discussion that definitely comes into play here of why it's so important to document, if you're a buyer's agent especially, when you do that final walkthrough, if you know there's going to be 30 days of possession, take a video of the property when you're doing that final walkthrough. Try to show as much of the home as you can, because you need it to be that you can prove any damage that occurs when they take possession, that damage was not there when they signed the documents at the closing table. So that's, it's hard to say what would happen if, bye Sue. It's hard to say what would happen if they, you know, there's a cracked window and it's a fight between, did the crack occur before or after closing? I don't know how a judge would rule in that regard, but I just know that as far as the contract is laid out, the seller is only responsible for damage that occurs during the occupancy period. If, as far as like this damage deposit escrow and all that. All right, this occupancy addendum is not a lease. All parties are advised to seek the advice of an attorney. In the event of a conflict between this occupancy addendum and any signed lease, the terms of the signed lease will control. Trying to cover ourselves there a little bit. So we have buyer signature, or purchaser, and seller's signature. So yeah, so that's it for the occupancy addendum, and then we can go into another one that is brand new for us, I believe. I don't believe we ever were using this before, because this was always kind of part of purchase agreement included in the normal inspections. But here we have a well and or septic addendum that I think will be used quite often whenever it's not on public city water. So this addendum is attached to and made part of the purchase agreement dated.
Jordan, do you want to do this one next week? It's 5.
Oh, you know what? Yes, let's do that. Okay. All right.
Or maybe we may need to make this a Monday, Wednesday thing until we get through all the addendums if we really want to go through all the new contracts, because there are 48 of them, I believe, or 49 of them.
So the February focus on forms will just become a forever focus on forms, which
Might
I'm
not be
okay
a horrible idea.
I mean, I think that it matters. I think that, the documents we use, the language, every word is written with intention. And so we need to know what that intention is. But yes, so next time we will do the well and septic addendum, and then we still have, a pool addendum. We still have the home sale contingency addendum. We have a whole bunch more. So we'll just keep it going. And I'm happy making this a regular Monday at 4:00. And then if we're doing addenda, it should just be, we have one at a time, should be able to make it easier on the time constraint.
Yeah, some of them will be good to do together, like the property contingency plus the removals of the property contingency, right? Things like that. But yes, honestly, this just brings up so many more things to think about every time we have these discussions. So
yes, and it kind of delays when they then go live in our electronic system, but it's worth doing now. It's worth making sure we have them exactly the way we want. So I'm gonna stop the recording for today.